Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. My pleasure.
So we're going to learn a little bit more about neuroaesthetics. Some of you maybe know what that is. Some of you may not. A lot of people have asked me, and I'm excited to learn from you.
You know,
So, yeah, I'm going to turn this over. Thank you so much.
thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Welcome. I heard traffic was bad for some people, so my apologies for that. But it is one of the last Fridays of summer, right? So I appreciate you being here. Oh, fabulous, fabulous! I love this energy. But I'm just, I'm delighted. So welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being interested in art and design, which is really, what keeps us all, I think, alive and going and becoming the kinds of people we need to be. So I really appreciate your interest and your time here. I want to thank Amelia and the museum for their very kind invitation to come here and share this work, but also especially to the Bobby Anspach Foundation, to Jane and Bob Anspach, who I've had the pleasure of spending some time with, and also Paula Baldoni, who's here. Who runs the foundation, and for their amazing work in supporting Bobby's legacy and really bringing it to the world, which I think is a huge gift. So the first time I saw Bobby's work was in New York, and it just struck me as this hugely visceral, explosion of contrast, right? There was a riot of color and light, and somehow this was an embodiment of calm. Like when you entered it, it was an embodiment of calm. And it was not at all what you expected. And so Bobby's installations, which I'm hoping all of you have seen, but I hope you'll get to see, if not now, which are called Places for Continuous Eye Contact, allow you this incredibly simple but very deceptive invitation to enter this atmosphere where you can spend time with yourself, with another person, feel the ability to connect, and watch what that does in your body. And the first time I did that, I thought it was extraordinary. I really, amid all of the shifting light and sound and really allowing you to sort of drop into your body, what I was left with was the undeniable presence of both my energy and this other human being. And that, I think, opens the door to intimacy, it opens the door to empathy, and this is what I think design and architecture should do as well. So here I am, I found so many parallels between his work as an artist and my work as an architect and designer and artist. And I'm just delighted to be able to be here to share this with you. So I'm Suchi Reddy. I'm an architect, artist, designer. I practice based in New York, and I practice around the world. And my work is guided by my mantra, which is form follows feeling. You've all probably heard of form follows function. This is what was drilled into me as a young student, and I felt something was really missing, that I needed to bring the conversation of how we experience art and architecture back to our bodies, and that this is a democratic space that we all own and that we all understand and that we all relate to in the same way, and that this should be the place that we talk to people about design from. So I kind of came to that mantra from that space, and about 15 years ago, I got really interested in a field called neuroaesthetics. It's a growing field. It's about 20 years old, which is young in science. And it's an interdisciplinary field that blends the work of designers, neuroscientists, architects, cognitive scientists, psychologists, several other fields, to really come together to look at what our environments are doing to us. How are they affecting our brains and bodies? And particularly colored through the lens, no pun really, of Bobby's work. It's really interesting because I think his radical legacy is that it allows you to really feel that connection and the power and the ability of an environment to change you, to change your mindset and to change your mood. And I think those things are incredibly important for us to remember as we design in the world, because I think we make a lot of places for a certain way of how people should feel, like we know how to make prisons, we don't make the rest of the world for the opposite, and it's a really radical shift that I think we need to make. So I'm very happy to be in this room with Bobby's radical work and really his ability to shift your attention and your focus. So with that, I have a lot of slides. So if anyone gets bored, just raise your hand and I'll, we can keep moving. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. So I'll let this play for a minute. It'll tell you a little bit more about me.
Architecture has the power to shape our psyche.
I was 10 years old when I realized that fact as my first epiphany in my childhood home in Chennai, India. I knew my physical home was shaping the person I would become. It was a protagonist in my life. And this conviction led me into architecture and through the trials and triumphs of my practice as the founder of REDDYMADE, based in New York City and practicing around the world now. As a young immigrant architect, the complex histories of bias in this country left an indelible impression on me, and they created a deep desire to change it. Design is always political. Whenever we make spaces, we address people's emotions and their behavioral and cultural circumstances. In all our projects, retail, residential, cultural, or commercial, we put this principle of care for people and community first. As a studio, REDDYMADE's work over the last decade has evolved to explore research at the intersection of neuroscience, the arts, and architecture. This allows us to better understand the power of space and spatial experience on our health, our brains, and our bodies. My mantra, form follows feeling, evolves from the strong belief that our environments are not just passive wrappers that facilitate our function. They act on us, they mold us, they shape our collective psyche and health. Statistics have proven that collective agency can actually improve the health of a community. And therefore, spaces and architecture can be constructed as monuments, not to the hubris and violence of oppressive systems, but they can celebrate the resilience and collective potential of our communities.
Future looks peaceful.
My future is momentum.
So you see where I come from. And I'll start with a project that was the first time we actually had the opportunity to bring this idea of neuroaesthetics to the world. And it was called A Space for Being, and it was launched during Salone, which is a big fair in Milan that happens every year, brings a huge crowd of designers and architects there from around the world. And the brief for the project was to create 3 different spaces that had the same function, and then allow people to stay in these spaces for 10 minutes without talking, without looking at their phones, which honestly, you know how difficult that is, right? You had to be 3 minutes in the installations with music and a guide. And to use that time to record bodily metrics, so things like skin conductance, skin temperature, heart rate variability, to show you that your body is actually reacting to space in a different way, that design is not at all subjective, that the things you think make you comfortable perhaps don't. Perhaps there are some other things at play here, and we should really think about what the power of design can actually be with that. So you entered this kind of white space, and what I did, and obviously this was like, 7,000 square feet, but we built it in a week, and we had to do it under extreme pressure. But what I really wanted to do was use real materials, real tactile materials. You could feel the energy of nothing about this was fake in any way. And this was an incredible collaboration along with Google and a lab at the Brain Sciences Institute at Johns Hopkins, which is called the International Arts and Mind Lab, and a furniture company called Muto. So you got a band that you wore. And obviously, you had to sign a release that told people that they could record your bodily metrics and that your data would be deleted in front of you so that your privacy was protected. And then you went through what I designed as these kinds of anechoic chambers. So kind of a quiet sort of cleansing palette space that from this space, the very first space, and these I threw in my watercolors here, I guess, into the first room, which was, I was inspired by the caves that humanity originally came from. So the walls were made of mud and the floor, the lighting came from the floor. I even had an 80-year-old cactus in that space. And then from that space, you went into the next one, which was very brightly colored and was more of a bossa nova kind of a space. And this had lights going in all directions, had colors moving in different directions. The music was different. There was music and scent in both spaces, and books you could read. So the first room had books about making and poetry and cooking, and this one had pop-up books, which I happen to love. So, and very bright flowers. And the third room that you went into was what we called the sublime room. This one was very white, very quiet, and actually had, the walls were made of paper that you could touch. It was very textural. I'd made these black artworks that you see here that were made of burned wood, so they kind of smelled in the room as well. You could smell this as you walked in. and you looked at books that had art. And, but I also chose that very carefully. It was very abstract art. It was simple shapes, things that allowed your mind to kind of rest on a line or a shape. And after that, what you did is go into another room where you took off the band and your data was decoded there, so, and was then studied, so that you then went into this space, which was kind of a forum, and you kind of waited and you got your results. So what was shown to you was a kind of a, instead of the data was shown to you not as a kind of list of numbers or a graph, but as a watercolor ring. And what you could see were these flares, these places where your body was either at rest or you were excited. So to show you that there were things that you were reacting to always in your environment. This is an unconscious, subconscious activity that's constantly happening. And it's a loop. You're acting on your environment's acting on you. And to understand the power of that interaction was really the point of this conversation. So this ring that you see on the screen, that's what you were given. That was your data. And you left with a whole series of a booklet of whichever space was determined that your body was maybe the most at ease in. We couldn't tell more from that, you know, because data can often have a lot of noise in it, and there were lots of very talented people dissecting this data to really understand how to parse it for these variables that we were looking at. But it was an incredibly important first move in really bringing to the world this knowledge that, yes, we can measure how we feel in space, and yes, we can look at that for its huge impacts that it can have in designing anything. So this is actually one of my favorite slides, I have to say. This is what we all look like. This is what you guys look like in this room right now, with all of this beautiful work of Bobby's around you. This is how you're feeling, this is how you're moving, and this is what connectivity, connection, all of this means, right? Being in community together and being able to be in a place together. And you can see how different they were. So this is another video that will tell you a little bit more about that. The way this project is unusual is that we are actually pursuing a principle. I really believe that form follows feeling, and feeling is really what space and architecture are about. Space actually affects people.
Design matters. It's why we spend the time making the decisions we do. Those things that we as designers intuit, neuroscience is now proving have an effect. Google created an exhibition that is showing design's impact on our biology.
The way that I explain neuroaesthetics is really simple. It's basically how your brain changes on the arts. When you have a heightened aesthetic experience, like a piece of music, a sunrise, things that really elevate your everyday experiences, they change you. They change your biology, they change your mood, they change your emotion.
I called Suchi Reddy and I said, taking the neuroaesthetic principles, could you create 3 different rooms that would evoke different responses?
The goal is to see how people resonate with space and to really find out whether what they think they resonate with is what their body is actually resonating with.
We respond to the aesthetics of our environments, whether we realize it or not. The band can demonstrate with data from the sensors that actually is happening. Heart activity, respiratory activity, skin temperature, skin conductance. We figure out from the data which room is the one that feels the calmest or the most at ease for people.
Does your physiology feel most peaceful? I think it's what people are searching for. The space between the notes, the place where they can come and just be.
The interiors where we work and where we live have a deep impact on our well-being. We always known it and believed in it, but we haven't been able to quantify it and improve it. You enter a space and it's like, I like it, but why?
This is about data used as a mirror back to yourself. Data is just a bunch of numbers, and we wanted to make it artistic in its expression.
It can be really hard to put an aesthetic experience into words. But suddenly by combining science and technology, we get a new language.
We've selected room 2 as the room that you were the most calm in.
Maybe a watercolor can tell more than 1,000 words.
Technology has the ability to help you know yourself better. The problems of the future are only going to become more complicated. Solutions have to happen in this collaboration of technology, the arts, and science.
So this was it was an incredibly important thing for us to be able to do, to reduce, in some ways, to distill the work of many decades, to really thinking about how do we make space, how do we, as designers, take all of these cues that we get all the time and take it from being just a functional response to a brief that every client brings to you, says, I want this and I need that, and it needs to be this big and this wide and that high, but really take that and turn it into something that's really expanding its full potential. And so we've expanded that work in the studio into other work, which we've been doing for 2 years now, which is a report that we did for a company about neurodiversity, which right now at least about 20% of any population identifies as some kind of neurodiverse, whether that's autistic or having ADHD or anxiety. And it becomes increasingly important for us to be able to, as designers, look at how to design for that and not to really make it something where we're designing for one person, but we need to, in understanding how to design for that person, understand for how we design for everyone and how do we bring this together. So in the old days, sustainability was a word that no one used and you didn't know what that was 10 years ago, really. And now it's kind of the underpinning, I think, of pretty much everything we do in the world because of how much materials even cost and how to be reasonable about that. But I think this thinking about neurodiversity is the umbrella. It's the inclusion that we need to think about in terms of how we design for everyone. So some of the things we did here is we looked at, actually I'll give you a brief intro into this because this is, it's not really public work, it's something that was commissioned and we did it for a client. But we looked at user journey. So we looked at what does a quote unquote normal person do walking around a space, what's happening during their day, where do they encounter friction, conflict, what takes them a little bit longer to do. And then we overlap that with someone who has a different kind of relationship to the world to see where those things got distorted. And then we mapped all these different curves onto each other to see how design could actually work as an intervener in those spaces to actually ease where we were seeing this friction. So if, for instance, someone had ADHD and had difficulty focusing on one screen when there were a lot of screens in the room, how do you organize and design for that so that that person is being able to work maximally while everyone else is also doing what they need to do. So it's very important work. It's very close to my heart, which is why I bring it up. And it's something that we continue to do in the studio, think about it in the lens of almost every project that we do, because there's days when every one of us is neurodiverse in some way, and we really need to be able to understand what that manifests as, This is another project that we did. It's for a prototypical hospital room. And here we looked at research that talked about how the stress of the parent or the caregiver influenced the recovery rates of the child. So the two things are they act on each other. And so we designed a room where you could have a private pod for the caretaker. And this was designed to be inserted into a standard hospital room and be able to create something. This was particularly done for children who were suffering from disorders of consciousness. So they were on their backs a lot, neurological disorders. So there were kids who were recovering from comas, et cetera, to see whether we could create a kind of a spatial prescription that actually would act along with the medical prescription to allow for faster rates of recovery. Because we know that if you have, for instance, a view into nature, your recovery rates are about 30% higher in any hospital. And we were hoping to be able to increase that impact by doing this. And also, so even if you had a room with no view, you could have images of nature, but also images of nature where you've sensed the passage of time. Because we have lots of different time clocks in every cell of our body. They all understand how to recover and resonate with you. and to look at these kinds of things. So part of this is just an introduction into the way we think about work in the studio, whether it's about hospitals, it's about installations, it's about retail. We got to do Google's very first retail store in the world. This was the first time the tech giant had actually become physical. And so what we wanted to do was, and this was built during the pandemic, so of course that presented its own challenges, but what we wanted to do was create a space that was warm, that you could exhale in, that wasn't sort of white and shiny and full of harsh light, but really allowed you to go in there and feel kind of the wonder of technology. Wonder is a term I'm going to keep coming back to, not just in our work, but particularly also in the context of Bobby's work here, which I think has this incredible element of causing this feeling of wonder, you know, when you see it. And wonder actually has incredible health effects. It actually allows everyone, for me, it allows everyone to see things from the same place. Like no matter of age and, you know, where you come from, if you feel like something is then you're like, everyone's in that place and you're reacting to whatever you're reacting to from that lens, right? So I try to create that in most of our work. And in this project in particular, it wasn't very well suited necessarily to a retail space. It was a very long space and we had to think about how to punctuate that. And what we wanted to do is create a technology store that dematerialized technology. So what you saw, this kind of glass volume that you see with the tubes, inside that were the screens that would show you software advances. But what you actually saw of that from the outside were these lights. And that was across from the front door. So this actually brought you into the space rather than seeing what you're so used to seeing in retail now, which is just a screen of whatever the store sells, to really show you this other kind of moving light show impact that brings you in. So these are all neuroaesthetic. People often ask me, how do you use neuroaesthetics in your work? These are all neuroaesthetic cues. So we look at research that's out there that we can employ in design to carefully bring all of these ideas together to actually create space. So this is the place where you get to experience the product. And here what we did is use very old technology. And when I say we, I mean a very incredibly capable team at Google as well, who designed these screens that were transparent. So you could see an object inside it, but you looked through the screen to see it. So the idea was also to always create this kind of fresh relationship to technology when you're looking at it, that you never look at it and think it's the same thing that you've seen before and you're just here to consume. It's really here to give you a window into something else and to allow you the opportunity to feel delight. And we created an installation in the middle of the space with cork furniture, and we were very mindful about why the selection of cork, because the temperature of cork is also very close to the temperature of your body. So when you sit on it at any time, it invites you to use it, you know. So it's not, it's all of these things add up in a space, and as a designer, it's always a question of how much of one and how little of the other do you do in order to get the effect. But this is where the skill and artistry of designers and architects comes into play. And so, yeah, we were super happy with the way the store turned out. In residential spaces, we use this knowledge in slightly different ways, where this, for instance, is it's an existing house in Florida. I got asked to work with a very dear client of mine to, do this house for him. And he was changing states of life. He had just lost his wife. He was moving into a different place, in a different life, in a different stage of life. And the challenge was to get him to use every room. And I said, I think I could do that. And so what we did is really respond to the way in which familiar objects, which a lot of the art was his old collection, interfaced with new things. So it always gave him the sense of being in this kind of old and new situation, right? He always felt at home, but he always felt inspired by something new. And where the light was coming in and how we bounced it, which it depends. I mean, this is Florida, so the light is quite different in different spaces, in different rooms. And the ability to kind of create these kinds of connections from one place to another, and to redo spaces like this staircase, for example, that wasn't at all calming and was the first thing you walked into in the house, which was my first desire to change. And which I had to convince him of. He was like, "This is perfectly fine stair. You need to do nothing to it." And I said, "I think I do." And no, it was yes, it was shiny, and was not what I wanted for him. I wanted him to feel this kind of sensuousness and beauty in the house the minute he entered, and it had to echo the architecture in a way that the existing thing didn't. So I had to bring this back to him. And then the artwork there that we commissioned is by an artist named Pei White, who's an incredible artist. And it's also a light fixture. So you experience this in different ways and different levels. It's about, she fills those shapes with rocks, etc. This is a different house. This is a house in New Jersey. But what we did here is also look at like different ways of modulating light entering the house. You'll see I'll talk about light and proportion and space often. And color, but really juxtaposing kind of a gentleness with a really directed light. So in this case, you see light coming in through these onyx shutters, but at the same time, the point of focus is this light fixture. That's a glass light fixture that's hanging there that can be very bright in contrast to the onyx. And so you can sort of work with this kind of modulation constantly to ensure that someone's feeling engaged and inspired by the space, which is sort of my goal always for all of my clients. And to play with texture. Texture is a very important thing in neuroaesthetics. It shows up in lots of different ways. We are constantly feeling things. Sound is also something that's incredibly important. Your ears never shut off, even when you're sleeping, you're hearing things. And that's how your body knows what's happening and how to stay safe. And all of these signals are constantly being interpreted by your body, right? So to understand how you modulate those things in space, whether it's in daytime or nighttime, or how you create those things, is something we think very carefully about and intentionally. So even if it looks like a house you've seen before, or a house, there's a lot of thought that goes into the careful choices that are made there that allow us both to interpret what our clients like and would like to have around them, but also what could possibly show them something new and something different about something they've seen before. So, and again, here you'll see this is a question of scale. It took a lot to find a rug and a piece of fabric that could actually work in the same way, but I did it. I was very happy that I did that, to be able to bring these kinds of plays of scale and plays of conversation between objects together too, so that you can really feel so connected in a space. And here again, like this is in Los Angeles. I think the reason I have all of these different ones is also to show you we've been working around the country and in lots of different parts of the world, and we always respond to whatever the local condition is. I did a house here in Westerly actually, which is super lovely and very beautiful, and you get to see the view, and we built a tower that actually got you high enough to be able to see the view, which was really beautiful. But so we respond to whatever the local condition is, which I think if I were to relate this to Bobby's work in some way, it really is. What is your local condition as a human, and how are you feeling in these things, right? So he's always looking at like, what mind state are you coming into this with? And so we look at what mind state can we create for people, but also what are our physical materials that are available, whether it's the context of the place or something you want to touch, or something where, for instance, in this bathroom, I placed it specifically so that I could see this one palm tree. And, it didn't just show up there. It didn't just happen, right? It happened through design to be able to give you that one point of focus in the distance. And this is, it's also a neuroaesthetic principle. It's called prospect and refuge. It allows you to be able to see out, but also to feel safe, and to be able to work with those ideas of how you bring attention elsewhere, but you can also feel kind of comforted. This one is a house in upstate New York, where we're also looking at the relationship to the indoors and the outdoors. So houses in landscape are something that very important to us, to be able to look at how we can bring that connection in as many ways as possible. I'll keep moving through some of these. This is again in Los Angeles. You can see how the light and shapes are moving around the house. And here again, it's a series of curves that are very carefully placed, whether it's in the ceiling or against the walls, to allow you to feel the relationship of both the natural materials inside as well as outside. And then this is a house we did in upstate New York as well. This we did with a very well-known artist. You might know his name, Ai Weiwei. So we worked together on this house. And here, the ideas of neuroaesthetics were really, again, to cite things so carefully so that this wing, for example, really highlighted this one large tree. There were 10 acres outside that you could look at, but really to orient things so that you had your focus on this one incredible specimen was something that we were very careful to be able to do. And, whoops, sorry. And the other thing was the windows in the rest of the house. We placed them so that they came to the kind of top of your eye and not any higher. So you didn't sort of lose yourself in the landscape, but your relationship to the landscape was always an embodied one, that you were always conscious of what you were looking at, you know, and how you were looking at it. The image on the left, I think, is an outdoor shower. Here, I used like a mirror finished stainless steel to really reflect the landscape. So it could really make you feel like you were in the whole thing. It actually stays clean, you know. I might be talking too fast. I have a tendency to do that, but if anybody, great. Here, this one is, and I put a lot of residential work in here because I felt like people would be interested in it. It's summertime, we're all thinking about our houses and leisure, so I thought it would be a nice thing. This was an apartment in New York City, and it was a single floor, but it was very high. And we had to introduce 3 bedrooms into the space using a mezzanine. So of course we came up with a whole design and we were ready to go. And we walked in and did demolition, and we found these incredible steel beams in the space and these incredible old wood timbers. It was a stables. And we had to scrap the whole design and start a whole new one. And really worked with the materials that we had in the space. So for me, in this case, it's really a sense of the materials that had lived in the space for 200 years. We took them and repurposed them to be able to actually make these spaces and anything that was in it. So we just exposed all of the steel. We cleaned it up. We created the 3 bedrooms, which you can see on the top there, and you'll see there's louvers. That's all created out of the wood from the space, but it also, there's, in the Middle East, there's this concept of a space. It's like an oriel window. It's pretty much like this window, but it's carved in wood. And it allows you to have a view out, but also to have privacy. And so we sort of took that idea and used it as a projecting oriel window in the space that would create the bedrooms, so that the space itself could breathe and be this very large space in which you could exhale. I'll go back one so you can see how high it was, and that you could sort of relax in it. And then this house, back to California. I'm all over the country, but this is a house in Venice, California, and had a very narrow lot. And so what we wanted to do is really allow the feeling of the house to engage all the way to the wall, so that the house always felt expanded, and that we were able to create this kind of feeling of inside and outside, living in both ways. That's so special to California and to Californian light. But in terms of neuroaesthetics, there's certain things I wanted to point out, like you'll see the reflections of the water on the underside of the building. We call that acoustic effect. And these kinds of constantly moving effects, if you remember what I said about the Google store and I was doing these constantly moving lights, these things attract us, right? Our brains engage with them differently. Our bodies are engaging to these moving patterns very differently. We never feel like a space is static when we have that information being transmitted to us. So to be able to gently introduce that wherever we can in order to elevate the whole experience, all using, you know, what we have at hand. We had a pool, we had to make a pool. So the pool had to do more than just be there for you to swim. It had to actually animate all of the other spaces as well and kind of do that very thoughtfully. So you'll see this is this is as you enter. So we created a whole entrance and a canopy so that you come in and then you're just held under this kind of feeling as you go into the house, and then you're sort of spread out into the rest of the space. They just sold it. They were very sad to leave. And yeah, of course.
Before launching into these mega projects, are you actually testing the residents on their neuroaesthetic reaction? That was my question.
Can I come back to that when I'm, yeah, I will. Actually, yeah, let's answer that now. No, I don't test anybody on anything. often I don't even tell them I'm working with neuroaesthetics. That's just who I do and what I am and how I do, you know. And if they come to me, they know that I'm thinking in this way. There's certainly things that, particularly I think in residential spaces, because it's for an intimate audience, and I get to know my clients very well. And many of my clients I've done multiple projects for over the years, so I get to know them even better. The kids have grown up in these houses, you know, I have a relationship with the family, I understand the kinds of things that they want. So there's no kind of testing, essentially, that I would dare to do on anyone. But what I do want to do is really understand from them the small cues of what makes them feel good. What gives them comfort? Where are they the most relaxed? Like something in their life. Like when I teach as well. I often ask my students, what's your first memory of a space that affected you? And it's really interesting to see how so many people don't know what that is. And then when they think about it, they realize what it is. And then they can see how that's affected a lot of things that they've chosen in their life, right? The things that they respond to. So those are the kinds of questions, I guess, that I ask. It's a great question. But I often don't explain either the science or the research or where I'm drawing these things from to people as I'm working, because that can often tend to make people too focused on the data. And I think that that's also an issue. And that's, I actually think, is what's so great about Bobby's work, is you go into this world of not knowing what it's going to do to you. You have no idea. You know, and if someone told you before that, you know, prolonged eye contact, it stimulates the social brain, it activates your mirror neurons, it does all of these things, you're going to go in there and have a different experience. So it's really beautiful, I think, in some ways, to be able to discover that, but to discover it through your body also, not through your brain. So when you walk into a space that's done and it's complete, then you feel it. Sorry. Yeah.
I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
One is the rings, and is there a percentage of the population that has certain shapes that, you know, that obviously things appeal to people differently, but there, you know, there is this sort of master.
Were there any rules we could garner from this? Yeah.
Question is, have you ever worked with spaces dealing with aging and longevity? Yeah, that's a very interesting age tech and all kinds of things related to space.
That is actually both great questions. Thank you. One of them, the first question is, because we couldn't save the data and we deleted everything, there was no way that we could actually sort of parse through that. But sort of anecdotally, I was out there asking people. And, you know, one of my favorite things that I saw was when two friends of mine came out and they were like, oh, we flared in the same space. And it was because they were smiling at the pop-up books, you know. So that's what happens when you smile. It's with someone else, something, right? Your body is reacting. You're changing the mood in the space. You're changing the vibe in the space. This is how it works. But this is how everything works. So to really think about connection and to think about that as a driver for design, I think is something that's very, very important. And then secondly, to answer your other question about aging, it's definitely on our minds. We've been approached for several projects to think about that. I've actually, the Cooper Hewitt Museum, the Smithsonian in New York, just had a triennial, and in the catalog of it, I'm in a conversation with someone named John Zeisel, who does a lot of work on aging. So he and I have been talking a lot about how to use all of these principles to really design for a different stage of life, you know, which I think is increasingly a very important question, certainly for me, you know, but also for everyone else, you know. And I think a huge, I mean, we should be thinking about it for everyone. And in fact, we're working with a developer to really look, and a neuroscientist right now, to look at how to design a whole community, not just for everyone, right? Like from the kids in the space to the older people in the space. So, and really understand how those can come together as well, because that's something that's very important for communal agency.
It's been said that we're in an epidemic of loneliness. So I'm wondering how neuroaesthetics and architecture can work together. If you're designing communities, how
you can address loneliness in it when we're just going to get more and more attached to our tech and our screen?
I think that, that's such an important question and aspect, and that is one of the places I think that using these kinds of design cues that allow people to just feel less friction, right? If there's something that just gives you a slightly less friction every single day that you had to encounter it, you're going to be a nicer person. And because you're like, you just are. That's just the nature of the beast that we all are. And if you continue to feel that way, then you can expand that to something else, right? So to be able to use that to create this kind of communal thing. I'll keep going. Usually, and the public installations are a great way actually to talk to you about community, because my work as an artist is in general large scale and in larger places where I bring large groups of people together. So I took you through some of the scientific and retail and residential work, but we do a lot of, over, I would say maybe the last 8 years or so, I've been doing large artworks in public places. This one is called Look Here, and it was at the National Building Museum in Washington, which is one of the largest interior spaces in Washington. And it makes anybody feel extremely tiny in it. It's not meant to make you feel like this was a space designed for you. This was a space designed for grandeur and big parties and all kinds of things, but not really for the human. So when I was asked to create a summer installation that actually taught people about architecture and about themselves and how to appreciate it, what I wanted to do was create this kind of communal thing. And this is where, I saw so many parallels to the way I think and the way that Bobby thought about his work. You'll see a lot of my childhood things come into my work. So these are, first what I did is I created this kind of elliptical ramp that lifted you up into a platform in the middle. And what that did is adjust the proportions of the space so that when you were in that platform, then you felt like the ceiling came down to you. And then you felt like it was sized for you. And then what I did was surround that with these giant childlike shapes that exploded, giant shapes of kaleidoscopes and those toys called fortune tellers, the ones that you sort of, expand and look at. And so they would reflect and refract the architecture, the very traditional architecture of this space in lots of different ways. And they also moved very slightly from the air that moved through the space. So the purpose of this installation was to really take you up through this journey into this kind of central installation, get you to experience the architecture perhaps in a way that you never did before. And so you could really see where the entrance and the exit were actually. It's a very traditional space, 4 quarters. You'd never know where the entrance is and where the exit is. It's always difficult. But the minute I introduced an ellipse into it and a rhomboid, everyone knew where it was. It reorganizes your understanding of space, right? This is what shape can do. It allows you wayfinding in a certain way that you can always see, I came in here and I know that's there, but you didn't otherwise. Or at least I didn't. It took me many tries. And what I also did is on some of these shapes, I put images of various historical events that had happened in Washington. It was the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. I felt like it was important for people also to see themselves reflected in their own history. Maybe there were children who hadn't been there for it and would be able to see themselves in the images of these important moments in all of our lives. So I think I have a little video in here too that should show. So these are, real photos. And I challenged people to take the same picture twice. Because part of what I wanted to do is ask people to really understand what the position of their body in space felt like. That if you moved, it was always different. And we're so used to taking pictures now, and we practically see through our cameras, to understand that what you see from your camera is not what you see through your eyes. And it was very clear. So I would tell people I'd give them a prize if they took the same picture twice. No one could. No one won the prize. So it's still out there, But it was a delight. It was really a delight. So this idea of how do you create community, how do you bring people together in these ways, when you give them a communal experience that allows them to feel the light and feel the wonder together, which I think in some ways Bobby's works do as well. You really feel that when you get into them. You can understand how someone else is. So I'll let you see a little bit of how they felt moving. So in the center, I actually created a rhomboid that had 2 kaleidoscopes inside of it, and you saw some of that in the very first video where people could look at each other and play with them. So I had lots of kids climbing in. It's great. It was really a wonderful experience of joy, I have to say. And then this is another installation that I did at the Smithsonian that was, I was asked to think about, to answer your question, Amy, to think about humans and their future with technology. And it was a competition to make a work about how humans could coexist with technology. And this also debuted during the pandemic. It started just before the pandemic. So then, of course, we went into the pandemic and all we were doing was living on our technology. And I was sort of like, And so I called the work Me Plus You. And what I did with it is, because for me, I think not having a dystopic vision of the future with technology really has to do with our own level of self-awareness. And I think in the age of AI, that's even more important. Like, it depends who we are in order to, and how well we know ourselves in order to be able to actually make sure all of that other stuff is working the way we want it to, and teaching us more about ourselves, right? So the work itself looks like that. And it's a collection of light, and it's in the center of this rotunda in the building. And you get to go and speak into these little clusters of lights. I called them mandalas. So I put a little microphone in there, and I asked people a question to give me one word for their future, and to speak that word into the cluster of lights. And so the idea was, when you ask someone for one word, they stop to think, which for me was the work. If you can stop to think about what you actually want your future to be, then I think we've done something. But then they would speak that word into the future, and the central kind of vertical piece had all these computers in it that used AI and ML to read both the emotion in the person's voice and the word that they input. And then they got reflected all of these light patterns and colors that I set up that were in different classes of whether it was happy or sad or engaged or not engaged or bored or, dystopic. And so they got these patterns of lights. And what the central piece did, it reflected the idea of a Jacquard loom, which was the very first computer anyway invented, but to be a digital loom that kind of wove everyone's colors together. So when you spoke and you got your colors, you would see them go into the central space. But because you knew you were affecting everyone else around you with your feelings about the future, that it's important for us to really think about the future meaningfully, to know that however we're thinking about it is affecting whoever's next to us. So that was really the idea of the work. And this is one of my favorite photos. It's so cute. And what, the beauty of working in a place like Washington is that it's a very open, our museums are free. People come to them, right? It's all kinds of people. And it's really wonderful to be able to see the reach of it from children to everybody, and really be able to see how they respond. And one of the things I found, there was a crew from PBS that was making a film about it, and they had a microphone behind one of the mandalas, and they said, "Suchi, what's going on? Like, they give me this like really sad word, and then they say the next word they say is better." Some people would do it again and again to see what they could get out of it. And for me, that was the idea of being listened to. Like, if you feel like your technology is really listening to you and there's empathy in that relationship, and you see some kind of beauty, then that beauty affects your next word, And these are visceral reactions. This is my kind of science, right? This is science I do. But these things affect us. You feel something beautiful, you're bound to do something nicer soon. And if we could all do that all the time, then maybe we'd be in a different place. So that's the hope. Anyway, I think that's my hope and Bobby's hope, honestly, to pull us together. We had the opportunity to revisit this work and reinstall it in a building in Detroit that's called Michigan Central Station. It was the kind of the image of the ruin of Detroit for many years, but just got fully redone. And in the South Concourse, I got to reinstall the work. And here, I made it an internal experience. So you walk in and into it instead of being outside of it. And the central piece became the kind of videos that you see in the historic portals that are behind you.
It's a work that really necessitates human presence to actually exist. It needs me and it needs you to actually exist as art. And we are what keeps it alive and keeps it sort of generating. And I think that's a beautiful metaphor for the future, right? The future isn't going to exist without all of us.
My future looks bright.
My future looks peaceful.
My future looks beautiful.
My future is momentum.
I love her. I really do. We also did a digital version of this because it was during the pandemic and we wanted it to be accessible to everyone. So we made a website that people could interact with. Is that still up? It's not still up, no. Yeah. This is our latest work. I just got to install this at the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens in New York City. So if anyone's there, it's on through October. And this work, my work's always inspired by, someone else's. And I came across this research by these Israeli researchers who were looking at the sounds that plants make when they're in distress. And they're hypersonic sounds. We don't hear them as humans, but they're going out to all the other species that can actually hear them. And they sound like little clicks. So I was really interested in this work, and I was thinking about what would happen if you could actually hear that, and what would happen then if you saw distress, or if you saw something that was happening in the landscape that looked like a glitch. Would you do something? Would it move you to interact with it and see how to change that and what to do with it? So this is a work called Turbulence, and we just installed it. So it's a series of reflective panels that you walk through, and it constantly changes your view of the landscape that you're in. And that's, I think, it for me. Unless you have other questions.
I'm just curious, through all this research you've done, especially at the beginning of your presentation with people coming into different rooms and environments, did you discover any kind of like universal truths, like pink makes people happier, blue makes people, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's what the person behind you was asking earlier. Yes and no. We did definitely find that everyone's an individual, and I think that's what makes all of this work so hard, right? We're all individual. Who knows? Like, if your mood changed from somebody running into you or cutting you off on the street and you walked in, your cortisol levels are in a different place. Like, I don't know if you're responding to what I'm doing in the same way that you did before. But given that, really understanding what the kind of universal principles are that perhaps all of us can relate to, it was very intentional for me that I made the very first room feel like a cave, and that the walls were earth, and the wood, the light came from below, and there was a tapestry that was made out of the dyes of flowers, and really had this kind of very tactile, because I knew that people coming off of seeing a million things would need to do that. And so they did that. And so most people thought that that's where their body was the most at ease, but they weren't. And so that's something that we did learn. It's not what you expect. You don't know, really. And you can't know unless you actually do this kind of iterative work. And what we're really looking to do, in my practice, as you can see, is rather unusual in the sense that I do architecture, I do design, I do art, and I do all kinds of them. And typically what you would see in most practices is someone who specializes in a certain kind of thing. But I'm really interested in this kind of interdisciplinary place where I can bring a holistic lens and a vision to ideas of connection and empathy and agency, which is really what I'm after. That's what I want people to feel in a space, and that's, I think we should be looking at the world to see how we feel in it, not how it looks. And that's a big ask, right? It has to look and feel right. And so you've got to get to the place where we can all do that. So, but you know, we certainly saw things like there were people from other countries who sometimes felt like, whoa, is this made for me? Like, is this too fancy? Like, can I actually go in here? Those kinds of things. And they're very important. It's very important information because you want design to allow everyone to feel comfortable, right? And then you have to understand what it was about it that made it that. And do you not do that again, or do you do it again for a certain reason? How do you employ all of these things? So often when I talk to designers or to students, I'll get asked, like, what are the 10 things you can do to make this, you know, and sadly that it's hard to do that because we're all individuals and because there is no sort of top 10. It just depends on the condition, and you have to bring your skill and your ideas to it to see how that works. And hopefully eventually we'll be able to get some longitudinal data on this kind of work, you know. So we look at it from one time period, and maybe someone looks at it when they're older, and we really get to study what all of this is over a period of 20 or 30 years. Would be really amazing. Not there yet.
I think it makes it actually amazing and beautiful because you create individual things. If everything would be the same, there is
Yeah, you can see I'm not interested in doing the same thing twice. Like that to me is like, you know, I don't know, why bother? But well, it also makes it hard. But yeah, there it is.
Is your studio collecting qualitative, anecdotal data after of the structures
Yes.
that you built? Okay.
Yeah, we definitely collect that information and hold it
Yeah.
because, you know, those are design lessons learned, right? We do that everywhere,
Okay.
you know, in like they would teach us properly in design school to do.
It would be so interesting to see a retrospective in 20 years with that qualitative
Yeah, like what did we
data
learn from
overlay.
this? Like Niposi was such an eye-opener for me, you know, to really like see people respond to beauty and know that it changes how they feel the next minute, the next second. That was really important for me to learn as a personal lesson, right? Because then I understand the power of what I'm playing with every day. I don't just think this is what I do for a living. I do it for a living, but I do it to really make sure that it's doing its best thing in the world. So.
Along those lines, given that people have not, so many of the structures that are populating our world were not built with neuroaesthetics in mind, and I think from the residential slides you showed us, you do a fair amount of adaptive reuse.
Yes.
Are there some buildings that you go in and you see the things that are absolutely hostile to a human?
For sure,
Like that
all the
has to
time.
go- How do you make that decision? Yeah.
Actually, brutalism has its moments. It does. It does have its moments. There's some beautiful brutalist buildings I could name.
It's also sometimes called brutalism for a reason.
Yeah. But, you know, like the Salk Institute, for example, is, you know, counts as that. But then when you're there and it's like you're in the plaza that's like, you know, and the sun lines up with this rivulet and you're like, oh, this is magic. You know, magic can happen anywhere. That's the other point of it. And magic can happen. It should happen. We should all be asking for that in our everyday lives, you know, like particularly like for me, and the reason I'm doing this talk is that Bobby's work had such a big effect on me. You know, I looked at it and I was like, I can't believe there's someone who was thinking like this through art in this way that can actually change things and make this kind of feeling of empathy and of connection, even of yourself, like when you stare at your own eye for a while, you know, what that does or how all these feels. It's not just a game, even though it's playful, it's deeply moving. And I think that you don't get that experience in contemporary art. You don't get a deeply moving and playful experience. We don't even ask that of art. We don't ask that of art. We don't ask that of architecture. We don't ask it. And we should. We should be asking it of our communities. We should be asking it of the people who are planning our towns. Like, how are we doing these things? You know, I spoke at like Bloomberg's City Lab, where they bring 600 mayors from around the country to talk to them about neuroaesthetics and really to talk about, can we design cities for not just, you know, here's the business sector and here's the industrial sector, but here's the sector for creativity, or here's the sector for innovation, and is that then like one thing, or is it 5 things that have to exist? You know, how do we feel safe on a streetscape? How do we bring all of these people together? There's tons of people working on this. It's not just me, right? There's so many people. I ride on the coattails of the work of so many other people who have inspired me and show me that there's information out there that could really help us if we used it and if we learned it and if we could figure out how it fit into the kinds of things we want to do.
Your work is so impressive, really beautiful.
Thank you.
It's just great. I was a school psychologist and worked with kids, and I'm just thinking of the ADHD and autism and some special needs classrooms. And I mean, some of your ideas would be so helpful because the kids would even tell you, ADHD, I need a tent. And so it would be like, how can we, set this up in a classroom where we can go aside and do this? Or overhead lighting, fluorescent lighting was so bad for some of those kids.
Exactly.
They just needed, and so just even small changes
exactly.
to make made a huge difference. And listening to them, and they would come up with some great ideas themselves. But I mean, I'm just thinking of your work. Oh my gosh, if we could work with classrooms.
No, I would love to. I'd love to do a school. Love to do a library. Yeah, we've been actually one of the neuroscientists I work with at. I collaborate with that I'm working on this development project with. She's doing a lot of work. She comes from a teaching background actually, which is sort of interesting. She comes from teaching into neuroscience, so she really understands the effect of science on people. Because that's the other thing, is like somehow we forget there's people involved. There's technology and there's science and there's all these things, but the human part of it gets lost. And no one's actually caring for the whole human. And so to be able to bring that back, and I think design is actually the right and possibly only way where you bring the whole human back into the frame in all of these conversations, whether it's in medical spaces or school spaces or whatever. This is the envelope, right? This is where we are. So to really figure that out, I think, is where it lives. It's a lot of work, and people have to be willing to want it and be willing to do it. Often the way that I do it is sort of kamikaze ninja work, right? Just do it, and then people are like, oh wow, oh that's what that did, and it's nice to be able to do that, but really would be great for everyone in the world to be demanding a better standard for everything that's calibrated a different way. But that's why I was so happy to actually get this invitation and for the Anspachs to invite me to do this work, because I really think that's also Bobby's legacy. I think he really had a very radical idea of how to make these kinds of objects and installations that would make you feel this, that you couldn't escape it, and that you then had to figure out who you were in relationship to this other person, this stranger that you might be in this tent with or whatever, that there's a beauty that I think his work really embodies very beautifully the essence of neuroaesthetics, that, it has, your environment has the power to change how you feel. And I think we all know that, it's not even new news, like everyone knows this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But to really take that in and turn it into action, I think is the hope and the legacy that I think that work like this can offer us.
What I love about it and what you're doing is you're honoring humans.
Exactly.
I mean, so much of what is done just takes the fact that people are going to experience this, be in it, use something. So many people just take that out of the equation. Like, we'll just build this thing and you'll have to deal with it.
You do whatever it is you do.
Right.
No. And honestly, I'll stand up for my profession. I'll say most architects want to, we want to serve and we want to highlight and we want to heighten what the brief is, right? But we don't often get the ability to do that. We have a lot of limiting factors. Yeah, and we have times and budgets and schedules, and it's not like I don't operate with those things. I operate with those things too, but we do have to, within those constraints, I think, if you can reframe why keep in mind why you're doing it, then you would do it differently. And it's, they sound like simple things, but they're not.
Have you ever been drawn to or had you worked in theater with set design?
Not yet. It would be so much fun. It really would be fun. Yeah, I know, it would be lovely. No, that's a very competitive and tough business, but yes, some of my favorite playwrights I would love in a minute to do it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I have an interest in neuroaesthetics and how it intersects with PTSD, trauma, and I'm an autism advocate. I
have been looking on my own, slowly finding information about other designers, artists working. Do you know of a great way to keep expanding our knowledge about who's out there doing this work?
There isn't something like that at the moment, but I think in the next couple of years we'll be able to. There's several organizations that are trying to pull this information together. There's one through the Aspen Institute that's trying to do that. There are a couple of other places as well, but I'm sure it'll happen soon. It's just hard.
Cross-disciplinary connection, collaboration
Yeah.
is just amazing.
Yeah, it's the only way to solve any problem, really. Everything is too complex to solve by yourself.
Yeah.
You just need so many minds, right? We need scientists, we need designers, we need technologists, we need data scientists, we need ecologists, we need everybody to look at everything all the time.
And although we're all informed by subjective experiences, someone may have gone into one of those rooms thinking they knew themselves, but because of an interaction they had with their parents way back when, they actually
didn't. I can't tell you how many times I get like, my grandmother's room was that green. I was like, oh. Didn't know. It happens.
But it's still
conditioning.
Informative each time, even if it can't, like you were saying, even if we can't get like this hard data, still sharing the information helps every time.
Yeah, and that's even a tension in the field. There's the hard data scientists, and then there's the human experience people. And hard data doesn't recognize a lot of what we do.
But you can see the changes.
Yeah, well, C is the definition of C is something that I'm working to expand. Certainly, I definitely think that our idea of data has to change. Yeah, that we need more metrics. We need more markers.
Thinking about the place for being and that so many of the participants were surprised by the results, like the place that they thought would be the most peaceful for them wasn't what actually the data showed. I'm wondering, how do you think we could go about helping people know themselves better, having more agency for, appointing their own spaces to actually soothe themselves?
I think there's a lot of design advocacy to be done, to be honest. Like, with a lot of my clients, and particularly residential clients, sometimes people who have never worked on a project or done something for themselves before, it really is an education process to help them to understand what they respond to. Like, people aren't even attuned in some ways to really look at, like, what is that and why? Why did I like that? Why did I like that there and not over there? To be able to spend the time and ask those questions. And honestly, I think it's a big problem that we're not teaching design to little ones. That we need to just learn. Like, we don't have the opportunity of growing up in countries where there's like all kinds of great architecture around you all the time, so you're sort of absorbing things. This country doesn't necessarily have that in every place. And you don't even have that context to frame things, right? So you need to be taught, and it's sadly lacking, even in high school. So yeah, I think that's a very important place to start. Personally, yeah.
I've never heard this term before, so this is just all fascinating to me. And I was wondering, was it your idea to present the data in that visual ring?
No, it wasn't my idea. I was too busy designing the spaces. There was a whole team that was thinking about. We were all thinking together about how this should come out.
And I might have missed this, but did the colors correspond with the emotional?
The blues and the greens were assigned to correspond with calmer feelings. Just it could have been anything else, but yeah. Yeah, I did some of that with the Me Plus You work too. Like, I set up a whole color and pattern language for myself based on color theory studies about what different colors and pigments meant, how to translate that from color and pigment into LED, which is a very different method, or glitter, or how you see color, right, and light. So yeah, it's a very different scenario.
I think some of us who go to therapy may be familiar with the fact that design can be a form of self-help and self-care, and I think my favorite thing that you said today was that wonder promotes health.
It does.
Because I think it speaks to such a larger movement maybe happening, and of course, was probably so validating to your work, but also should be so validating to cultural institutions and, you know,
Yes.
art spaces and artists
Exactly.
at large, which I think is so
Right.
fascinating.
Yeah.
But really choosing wonder as the, you know,
Yeah, like for
rather
me,
than beauty or something.
for sure, it's like it's awe. There's a beautiful book called Awe. I'd recommend you guys read it. There's a lot of work on this because it affects your vagus nerve, and your vagal nerve does a lot. There's some new medical therapies also that are starting stimulating the vagus nerve. So they're, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
And cultural, you're right. Cultural institutions play a very important role. That's one of their very important roles.
the value that they hold that,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and like even if you go to the Natural History Museum and you see all the butterflies, or you know, and you feel the wonder of that, and you understand your connection to the world and another species, it changes you. But to actually recognize the value of that, not just to shove it in, that's a thing I did, and go ahead, right? To bring people back to a sort of a self-awareness and a connected awareness with their community and their world is something that I think we need to be able to do.
So that means that when one looks at a piece of art that's awe-inspiring, would that be the same when one makes something? Oh, this is
It's, yeah, possibly, yeah. I think the act of creativity is also has different psychological benefits too. One of the things it does is battle loneliness. So it allows you to do that because you're communing with an idea and stuff. Yeah.
I think what is beautiful if you create space where people are almost teached or able to be for a moment and be exposed, be with them, be in awe, and this is the magic also, just to let them be still for
Yeah, just to be, right? And to learn how to be. Like, we don't even have that much anymore. And to be able to recultivate that, to know that we need to recultivate that, to start movements around this kind of thing. I think that it takes a lot, everyone. It takes everyone to say this is important to our health. It's just damaging to do all the other things. So as much as we need all the other things, that to know where to put them.
I'm thinking about you now as an individual, and so much of your, I mean, you're working in so many different arenas, but another thing that you do is you're pretty vocal about this work probably because you understand the advocacy needed, and reaching people, like all of us in this room, it helps people understand the value of it. Does that provide you joy?
Being vocal?
You know. Being on for crowds of people that you don't know.
You know, such an interesting question. I mean, I've been doing it for a long time now. So I was asked before I came in here, are you excited to go give you a talk? And I said, excited is the word. You know, for me, it's always really amazing to see how people engage with the work. You know, because it's always a lesson. Like, we don't do or make anything in a vacuum, right? Like, none of this exists in a vacuum. It exists for other people. That connection is the ground of being human. That's what Bobby's works are based on. That's what my work is based on. You know, we connect that, and that teaches me a lot. So I don't know that I'll have to think about it and see.
It's okay if it wears you out a
I
little
know, it doesn't that much anymore, but it used to. Yeah, I'm also an introvert on the other side of things. So I had to sort of learn, you know, to say that if I really want to do something, then I better do the work. So I did the work as best I could. But yeah, hoping that it continues. But the work actually sustains me. Honestly, the work gives me the biggest joy. It really sustains me. And there's nothing like that feeling. There's nothing like it. And so I go through the pain for that. Not that this is pain, but that. Just making something, you know, and making it good is hard. So to try and, the joy that comes from when realizing it is just amazing and magical. And yeah. So, well, thank you all for listening. It's lovely to see all these engaged people in Newport. Awesome.
Wow. So thank you so much for coming.
I do. I teach at Columbia and at Cooper Union this year. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your My pleasure. For listening and for appreciating it.
I have both kids which are super interested to come to your talk, but they couldn't make it because of the board. Is there any platform you share your knowledge or your
They can actually they can follow us on Instagram. There's a lot of stuff that happens there. Yeah, it's right.
It is would we
yeah,
meet?
yeah,
Yes.
That one.
This is nice. Okay.